Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Holly Kinas. I'm a conservation analyst at the Miistakis Institute. I've been with Miistakis for almost 4 years now, and I'm very excited today to be presenting Putting Beavers to Work for Watershed Resiliency and Restoration as part of the Miistakis Monday webinar series. So first, I'm just going to go over a quick little tutorial on some of our webinar tech. So you'll notice that all of you have been muted when you've joined. There's also a chat window, so if you have any questions, please be sure that you use the chat box, and you can enter these questions as we go, as you think of them. I will note one thing, that when you do submit a question to the chat, please ensure that you select the question to go to all panelists and attendees, just to make sure that everyone can see your question. And I'll also be reading them back as well. So a quick little intro for those of you who aren't too familiar with the Miistakis Institute. So we're a nonprofit, charitable, applied research institute, and we're affiliated with Mount Royal University here in Calgary. So what we do is that we do innovative research, so we can provide information to decision makers so that they can make conservation-minded decisions to promote healthy landscapes. Our partners on our Putting Beavers to Work project are cows and fish. I'm sure many of you are aware of or have heard of cows and fish before. They've been around for about 20 years, and they do work on riparian health. So they work a lot with cattle operators and grazers, as well as, of course, dealing with fish species that are in the riparian areas. And some of you might have been familiar or have picked up a copy of their publication here, seen on the left, Beaver, our watershed partner. So I'll start with a little background on how the Beaver project got started. So it started in 2012 when we partnered with Ann and Sandy Cross Conservation Area, who wanted to reintroduce beavers onto their property there. So we helped them develop a citizen science program for monitoring their riparian health before and after the release. From this program, we quickly realized the potential that beavers had to address many of our watershed challenges. And we were also approached by a lot of people who had a desire to coexist with beavers and to realize their benefits on the landscape, but they needed more information on how they could do that and how they could deal with some of the challenges that beavers can sometimes pose. So we then, after, authored a report on the actual use of beavers for watershed restoration, mostly done in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. So our goals of this project have been relatively the same since 2012. And that is to encourage coexistence between humans and beavers. And we have this goal so that we can maintain beavers on the landscape, so that we can have the benefits of watershed resiliency and restoration. And we do this by several different approaches, but mainly by decreasing conflict, fostering social tolerance, heightening the understanding of beavers' benefits to our watershed. Okay, so we're going to do a poll. My colleague Guy Greenaway is helping me with the webinar today. We were having some polling issues this morning, so hopefully we'll be able to get that up and running for you guys. So the question that we have is, please describe yourself. So the webinar that you're attending today, are you primarily doing it as one of the following groups here? Let's see if we can get the poll up and running. Okay, I see that people are voting. Just let it go for another few seconds here. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go back into a little bit of background here on the beavers. So This is our North American beaver, Castor canadensis. There is another species of beaver as well, the Eurasian beaver, and they're found in parts of Europe. And then that was also a species that was introduced into Argentina as well. As many of us know, we have quite a long history with the beaver, and one of the most notable events that we have with beaver, of course, results around the fur trade. So beaver were hunted and trapped nearly to extinction, and experts estimate that we lost almost 90% of the population of beavers across North America. And the primary reason for the fur trade is, as you can see on the left, it was for the height of the fashion industry in Europe. So once they trapped and removed a lot of the Eurasian beaver in Europe, when they came to North America, they saw the wealth of the beaver population here and began shipping the pelts back to parts of Europe for the production of top hats. Now it's interesting to note that even though top hats are not part of our fashion industry now, beaver pelts are still being used today to produce many of our felt cowboy hats. So in Canada, we have an interesting relationship with beaver. They're Canada's national symbol, and we have over 700 places that have beaver in the name of the place, whether it's a town or a county or a river, and 50 of these occur in Alberta as well. And this photo, of course, is from Beaver County, which is in central Alberta. And beavers can cause us some concerns. I'm sure many of you are aware of these, but I'm going to just kind of go over them a little bit, the top 3 concerns that we have. So the first one here is, of course, flooding of roadways. Another major concern is flooding of cropland or range. And then also, of course, felling of trees. And there's different tolerance levels between these different challenges, and depending on how severe they might be. But there are ways that we can work to address these challenges in a way that makes everyone happy, including the beaver. And I'll get to those a little bit later. But I want to just talk a little bit about beaver biology. So a typical beaver colony or family size is 2 to 6 individuals, and that's made up of 2 parent beavers, and then 2 young of the year, so they're the little baby beavers, and then the other 2 are usually the 1 to 2 year olds. So these are the ones that they'll stay with their family colony for 2 years before they disperse, and use this time as sort of an apprenticeship to learn how to beaver. So that's dam building, lodge building, storing food for the winter. And when it is time for the young beavers to disperse, they can actually travel overland about 15 kilometers, which is quite impressive. And they are territorial, so they try to move quite far away into like a neighboring community. And there is even some evidence, which just astonishes me. There's some evidence that the adult beaver, particularly the male, will actually go out with his young ones that are dispersing, help them get set up before he returns back home, which I think is a pretty interesting aspect of their life history here. And I just want to say they build 2 structures primarily. So they build dams to store water. You can see that image on the top. And then at the bottom is a picture of a lodge, and their lodges act as their shelter, and that's where they live out their winter days. They don't hibernate, so they'll stay active in their lodge all winter, and they'll access what is called a food cache just outside of their lodge by their underwater entrances, and so they'll spend all their time there in the winter. Here's another interesting fact about beaver biology. So beavers don't just eat wood. So annually, their diet is only about 53% wood. And a lot of the rest of their diet, especially in the spring and summertime, is made up of the other vegetation that I have listed here. So cattails, bulrushes, pond and duckweed, grasses, forbs, that sort of thing. So I'm not sure what this little guy is chewing on here, but he's also wearing a nice little moss tape as well. And I do want to address one misconception is that there was a belief that beavers do eat fish, which they do not. That was just proven. So beavers do not eat fish. So current landscape challenges here in Alberta. So in Alberta, we have a very interesting climate, ecosystem, and we quite often are having to deal with both drought and with flood. So the photo here on the left, of course, we're looking at a drought situation. And here's a drought priority scoring map that was developed by actually one of our funders of this program, the Alberta government's Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program. So they developed both a drought and a flood priority scoring map. So you can see much of Alberta scores highly for being at risk for both flood and drought. And of course, headlines like these are starting to become more and more prolific as we start dealing with some of the impacts and changes that we're seeing to much of our climate. So how exactly can beavers help us with this situation? And why did we put this project together? So I have a picture here of a stream that had beavers absent from the landscape in 2005. And then once beavers returned, there's a before and after shot, I guess, of 2013. So beavers keep water on the landscape. And now whether that's flood or drought mitigation, they can help with both those things. And in this particular study, they also found that beavers were able to also decrease the water temperature in the streams downstream as well, which is pretty important for a lot of our imperiled fish species that we have here in Alberta. And here's an on-the-ground look of kind of what that previous slide looked like. So this is an example of a stream that have had beavers removed from the landscape for many years. You can see it's really down cut. There's lots of removal from the floodplain. The water table is quite low compared to what it used to be. And this is a pretty stark comparison when we compare it to a photo of a similar landscape where beavers have remained on the landscape. So you can see just like the luscious riparian growth kind of on the edges of the stream there, as well as the elevated water table. There's reconnection to the floodplain, which I'll get to more in a second here. So beavers have the ability to increase our floodplain. So you can see the arrows here are pointing out all the beaver dams. These are pretty historic beaver dams. The beavers have either, as part of their natural process, they will, move from one site to another. So you can see here, I would say the beavers aren't active here, but you can really see the width that they've given to this floodplain. And they can increase the size by about 12 times of what a normal stream would have if beavers were not present on it. Another important feature that, another important impact that beavers have on the landscape is the decrease in stream speed and power. Now, why this is really important is that it removes a lot of the erosive power of the streams. So we won't get that like edge cutting, down cutting of the streams. It really slows that water down because it's ponded behind each of the dams. And these dams, some people might even state that they kind of act as a speed bump to the water. And why these speed bumps are important is that it allows the water to settle into the ground, which is where we get the raising of the water table here. So beavers are considered kind of a water banker. So you can see in the little pie chart that what you can actually see from surface water of the beaver pond is just a small fraction of the water storage that is provided by beavers. So most of the water storage happens in the shallow groundwater that is both underneath and adjacent to the beaver pond. And why that is really important is especially to our stream permanence downstream. So because the groundwater table has that opportunity to recharge, that groundwater is then able to be released further downstream, especially during those times of like a hot, dry summer when some streams might dry up. And you can see, of course, here depicted in the image that beavers allow for a lot of biodiversity to happen on the landscape with all the different species relying on the beaver dams, their ponds, and even their tree cutting as well. And of course, it's important to note the more water on the landscape, the better the fire break that you have. And some landowners that we've been working with have actually been working to maintain beavers on the landscape just because they're aware that they're in a higher fire risk area. So having water on their landscape has been really important in their fire prevention plan. And like I mentioned, some of the stream benefits that beavers provide us is that they can turn intermittently flowing streams, so streams that might typically dry up kind of in the hot, dry end of summer in August, and they can turn these into permanently flowing streams. They'll increase your annual flow amount of streams by about 2 to 10 times, and they retain water 50% longer. Now, not only do they have an impact on stream health, but they also have an impact on the amount of sediment that is in these streams and systems. So you can see in the nice little depiction here, the beaver at work with all these tandem dump trucks. So one beaver pond can actually store up to 382 tandem dump truck loads of sediment. So within this sediment, we're talking about suspended solids, phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon, and fecal coliforms as well. So you can see the breakdown here of water that is released from the pond downstream has a lot less contaminants and pollutants in it. One of the other benefits that beavers bring to the landscape is that they mitigate flooding, which seems a little counterintuitive when we say that they store all this water on the landscape. But it's really, really impactful and really interesting. So just for an example, Dr. Cherie Westbrook has been doing research on beavers. She's a hydrologist with the University of Saskatchewan, and she's been doing research on beavers and canadensis for many years. And she had some of her equipment installed during the flood of 2013. And she found, amazingly, when you think about the flood of 2013, you think about all the human infrastructure and gray infrastructure that was damaged as a result of the flood. So you'd think that all the beaver dams would just have been washed out. But it was quite incredible that she found only about a third of the dams were entirely breached. Another third of them sustained some damage, so maybe one side kind of blew out or water was going over the top. But a third of the dams remained, which is pretty impressive when you think about a beaver creating a dam that has just mud and sticks. And she also found that the dams that remained and that even the dams that were damaged, they were able to retain floodwaters and delay the flood peak. So you have less water rushing downstream all at once because they were able to delay that. So like I said, kind of thinking of it like a speed bump. And then of course, another aspect, another benefit that beavers have on our landscape that most of us are aware of is that they create an immense amount of high quality habitat and they really enable biodiversity. So on the left here, we have a picture of northern leopard frog. They're an endangered species. And then of course we have a picture of salmon jumping up a dam as well. And fish and salmon, fish, salmon and fish. Fish and beavers have an interesting relationship. There's a lot of misconceptions around their relationship, but it's important to keep in mind that beavers and fish have evolved together for millions of years. So beavers actually have a positive impact on native fish species. And I can talk to that a little bit more later. So I have another poll for you guys. So have you ever considered beavers as a natural infrastructure tool? So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. These answers are coming in, so I'll just keep it open for a few more seconds. Okay, I think we can proceed forward. So thank you for that. So beavers and natural infrastructure. So I want to loop back and really bring it to how these two things are related. So here we have our beaver, our charismatic critter, ecosystem engineer, keystone species, whatever you may want to call him. I'm sure some of you have other names for beavers too. And here we have the beaver dam. So I would consider the beaver dam as the actual natural infrastructure. Beaver dams, of course, create a wetland. That wetland would also be considered their natural infrastructure. From that infrastructure, the function that is provided is water storage. That water storage provides an ecosystem service to us humans, which is flood and drought mitigation. And the ultimate outcome of that is enhanced climate resilience. So how exactly is our project putting beavers to work? Well, we like to take a multifaceted approach. So first, when I was talking about fostering coexistence, so how we actually do that is through educational workshops, building of coexistence tools, which I'll talk a little bit about later, researching new tools that are being used, creation of awareness materials, hosting of beaver symposiums where we can share a lot of our knowledge, and then research into attitudes and perceptions around beavers. So I want to talk firstly about the research that we've done about these attitudes and perceptions. So we wanted to gauge the level of Albertans' knowledge around their perception of beavers, their habitat, and their management. So we had an overwhelming response when we did this. It was an online survey in 2016. We had 639 responses from all across Alberta. The map here illustrates the different counties and municipalities where we had responses from. So it's a pretty broad distribution. And I won't go through all of these in detail, but our top 5 findings were that there is support for coexistence with beavers in Alberta. There is a clear need to address the damages that are caused. Benefits are being realized on the landscape, but we could do a lot more work with providing information on what these benefits are. There is a need to better understand the roles and responsibilities with regards to beaver management. And then there's also this desire for enhanced education on the various topics surrounding beavers. So whether that's ecology, their relationship with fish, how to coexist with them, those are kind of the key points that people pointed out to us. So we use these survey results to refine many of the topics that we cover for our future work. So these are webinars, workshops, symposiums, and then also we created targeted awareness materials. So here's an example of 2 of the fact sheets that we created as part of our awareness materials. And beavers and fish, the one on the right, came out with a direct result of people from the survey saying, you know, I want to learn more about this relationship between beavers and fish. And then, of course, our other one here is on beaver coexistence tools. And both of these can be found on our website, which I'll post the link to after. Another part of our awareness materials is the creation of videos. So these videos here on the right-hand side are more of a learning training video on when we've installed some coexistence tools and how that was done. And then the videos on the left are interviews with landowners as to why they want to coexist. And some of them are not 100% sold on wanting to coexist with beavers, but they see the important benefits that they have on their land. And so they figured out a way to coexist harmoniously. Another important facet of our project is the symposiums that we've hosted. So we've hosted 2 Alberta-based symposiums. We host them every 2nd year. Our most recent one was just in October 2019. We had over 70 people attend this symposium. And we had presentations from across Western Canada and the United States, as well as a film screening. And it was quite nice because we did this as a 2-day symposium. So the first day was kind of the in-class research perspectives and presentations and a panel discussion. And the second day allowed us to do a field trip out to some coexistence tool sites. So this is one of the sites that I'll explain a little bit more later, but we had 50 people participate in that site tour, and we visited 3 different sites that day. One other important thing, and this comes out of the symposium and a lot of the work that the collaborative is doing, is really trying to create a community of practice. Because what we're finding is that a lot of groups or municipalities are kind of doing little pockets of work in their own little area, but there's no way to really share that or discover that with other groups. So along with the symposium, we're trying to create this community practice. So we do that by way of our website, so you can sign up for our mailing list there. Right now, our mailing list has over 450 members, and that it's quite a broad group. It's made up of a lot of Alberta residents, but also a lot from Western Canada, the Pacific Northwest United States, and then even some European contingents as well. We do a lot of social media outreach on both our Facebook and Twitter for Miistakis and cows and fish. And then Miistakis and cows and fish are also available to respond to requests. So we get a lot of emails or phone calls about, people saying, my road is flooded, I don't want to kill the beaver, what should I do? Is there an option? So we're able to point them in the right direction when it comes to tools that are available in those situations. Or, we've also developed, you might have noticed, a little matchmaking word on there. So we created a database that kind of, so relocation isn't allowed in Alberta readily. It's done on a permit case-by-case basis. So we quite often get approached by landowners who said, I have these beavers, I don't really want to kill them, but they're kind of causing me problems. Maybe I can donate them somewhere. And then we have other people saying that, beavers have been gone for a very long time and we would like to bring them back to our landscape. So we've been tracking this in the background so that one day when relocation is more of a feasible option, we can kind of start making some of those matches. And another piece of ongoing work that we're doing is also a map of where some of these coexistence tools are being installed. And I can show you what these tools are here in a second. So lastly, and I'll put up the link at the end as well, but if you were to jot it down, this is what our Beaver website looks like. This is where you'll find all of our Beaver related resources between Miistakis, cows and fish, the collaborative, and then many other resources, papers that have been published from researchers who are in this field, that sort of thing. So I'd encourage you to check that out and sign up for our mailing list there. Now to talk about coexistence tools. So two of the primary coexistence tools that we look at are culvert protectors and pond levelers. So first I'm going to talk about a culvert protector, which falls into the category of barriers or exclusion fencing. Tree wrapping would also kind of fall into that exclusion fencing category. And we offer train the trainer workshops so that we can really broaden the use of these tools by training municipal folks or landowners who have an interest on installing these but want to learn how. So we train them so that they can go forward and install them elsewhere as well. So here's an example of a culvert protector. You'll notice that it is essentially a trapezoidal cage that is around a culvert. Now the shape is really important here, just because that trapezoidal shape allows the water to flow through, but the beaver are far enough that they don't have a big urge to plug the culvert, because one of their instincts is the feel of running water is one of their instincts to plug. And then also if they do try to kind of plug this, the water will just kind of wash the debris off to the side. And then here's another example of how you can protect culverts from beaver plugging as well. And this is a beaver-proof culvert. So there's a lot of culverts out there that claim to be beaver-proof. This is one of the designs that we've been using as a case study because it functions so well. So you can see that there's a grate at the top of the culvert. It's a T-junction on this culvert. The bottom looks exactly the same. And what it does is that it prevents a beaver from swimming up the culvert with a stick in its mouth. And then it also funnels the sound of the running water, which is the other instinctive draw for beavers to plug. It funnels that sound upwards because of the shape of that T-junction. So here I will just take you to site at Griffith Woods Park, and I'll show you what one of the functioning culvert protectors looks like. Let me know if the sound is okay here. Let me just hold my chat box so that I can see if the sound is okay. Okay, so it appears the video is a little choppy. Wow, I thought it was a very fun video. Let me just see if I can clear that up a bit. Okay, it looks like we're having some issues with the video here, and I apologize for that. So we'll try to get the video running when we post the slide deck at least, or at least I'll post the video on with a link to the slide deck. So let's just keep going forward. So here's the other coexistence tool that I want to mention today. So this is our pond leveler. So what a pond leveler does, it essentially acts as a bathtub, similar to like a bathtub overflow valve. So you can see here, I hope you can see the mouse. So we have our beaver down here on the right, and the level that this pipe is set at will be the maximum height that the pond level will reach. So let's say this pond is adjacent to a road, and as the dam gets taller and water, like spring flow, you'll get more and more water, and the water might start going over the road and blocking the road. So what this allows is it allows us to regulate that water level, and then the mesh kind of pod on the end here prevents the beaver from being able to dam the intake. But the size of the mesh, like the size of that cage, actually again moves the beaver away from feeling that flow of running water, so they don't really have much of a desire to even plug that at all. And then this is just an example of a pond leveler that was installed in Lac St. Anne County. And this is, I believe, one of the examples of the video that we created on how these tools are typically installed. And you can see the crew here is getting ready to float that intake cage further back into the pond. And then the photo on the right-hand side is the outflow from the dam. So we have a little bit of a sneak peek here. We're developing a fact sheet on the cost effectiveness of these tools. So traditionally, and I'll talk maybe about that culvert protector. What I have said in the video, I'll just tell you now. So with the culvert protectors, they can be quite a broad cost savings, and where these cost savings typically come is by way of maintenance over time. So if you have beaver at a site where there's a culvert being plugged, typically it would require 2 or more staff people to go out almost weekly during the whole spring, summer, fall to remove debris from that culvert. So not only is that time consuming and costly, but it can also be quite dangerous for staff people as well. So by installing a culvert protector, The costs vary, but typically a cost of a culvert protector like the one I showed before is $500 to $800 just of material supply. So they can be quite cost effective. So looking at the numbers here that we have on the slide, so installing either a pond leveler or a culvert protector instead of traditional management approaches, which are like dam removal, lethal trapping of the beavers, you can see the cost savings are quite substantial. So in the Alberta case studies that we looked at, we were at 60 to 90% cost savings. And then some of the other studies we looked at in the United States, they were coastal environments, so they varied a little bit and are a little bit different than Alberta, but the cost savings are still very apparent. So to summarize, before we take some questions here, I just want to say we recognize that beavers cause challenges, but there are solutions to these challenges and solutions that allow beavers to remain on the landscape. And by beavers remaining on the landscape, they're providing us with watershed resiliency in the face of climate change, drought, flood, fire. And I'll put poll 3 up, but if I understand it correctly, I think you guys answered all the polls to begin with. So the question here was, have you learned new information that you will share with others or that you will use to help implement beaver coexistence as a result of this webinar? So I hope you have. Feel free to let me know after if you found this really helpful or you didn't find it helpful. I mean, constructive criticism as well. I'd like to thank our funders. So like I said, the Alberta Government Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program has been a longtime supporter of our Beaver project, as has the Calgary Foundation. So coming back to the Miistakis Monday webinar, so you can find us here at noon every Monday. Here's the link to our webinar page. So on this webinar page, you'll be able to sign up for new webinars that are coming, and then you can also view the slide deck and the recording of this webinar as well, and past webinars. And now I can open it up to some questions. I was having some issues viewing the chat, so we might have to play this by ear, but I'll see what I can get open here. And then I'll also put up my contact information. It'll just take me a second here to read through some of the questions. Okay, so I think Guy is going to send me the questions since I can't see some of them in the chat.
Holly, why don't I just say them to you?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay, so the first question is, are there any issues on pond levelers for Alberta's winter conditions?
Oh, good question. So we have had this question before. The pond levelers actually fare pretty well in the winter. There is a degree of maintenance both with pond levelers and culvert protectors. Maintenance is an important aspect of that. Typically, it's much less maintenance than what would be required if the tool wasn't installed. Like for example, you would normally have to go to a culvert protector site once or twice a year. I'd say like spring and fall to clear it of any debris that has washed up against it, and to ensure that yes, there is no winter damage from any ice formation. We haven't had any impact from ice formation or anything like that, but it is always important to check those out, especially in the spring, especially if we've had a very harsh winter, I would say.
So the next one is, are there any chewing issues with the exclusionary fencing?
Good question. Yes and no. So with the exclusionary fencing, it's a very particular type of fencing material that we use those exclusion devices. So whether that is tree wrapping, pond levelers, culvert protectors. So it's hog wire. I believe it's 6 gauge, and I have a material sheet that we're just finalizing, so I can post that up on the website as well. But there used to be this notion of people wiring their trees with chicken wire, and then being frustrated when it didn't prevent beavers from chewing because they would just chew right through the chicken wire. So when it comes to the culvert protectors, that's a little bit different. We use a bigger mesh, but I believe for the tree wiring, it's 1 inch by 1 inch openings, and we do it up to that 6 gauge, 4 feet up the tree. So we have a wiring example on the website, so I encourage you to check that out, and that has some examples of the type of material that needs to be used to be effective. Otherwise, yes, beavers could chew through it.
The next one is, have you worked with the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association and or Rural Municipalities Alberta?
So both AUMA and RMA have been very happy to share when we produce new awareness materials, new videos, or when we have an open call for workshops for people to participate in. So we haven't really worked with them per se, but they have promoted a lot of our work through their websites and mailing lists as well.
And then the next one is, can you suggest any approaches for preventing beavers from blocking up fish ladders?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to say that I haven't seen an example myself, and I would have to know, to be honest, I'm not sure structurally very much. I'm pretty unfamiliar with the structural components of fish ladders and if they vary a lot. I do know there is an example of a fish ladder pond leveler system that was installed in the Lower Mainland in BC. We have it in one of our other presentations that we have posted on our Beaver website as well. So they're calling it the fish lift, and there have been questions specifically in BC because of the imperiled salmon populations. So when pond levelers are installed there, they're piloting this new combination device that acts sort of as it is a fish ladder and a pond leveler, just to increase the likelihood of fish being able to get through there. But as for protecting a fish ladder, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one.
The next one is, does the pond leveler pipe also get dammed, and how do you resist that?
Yeah, so the pipe itself doesn't get dammed, of course, at the inflow side because we have that cage around it. And on the outflow side, it's actually quite difficult for the beaver to plug that, just because any kind of, first of all, the diameter of the pipe it's fairly large. It can be kind of 12-inch diameter, but that's not large enough for a beaver to wedge a substantial stick in. And if they are able to get some stick and mud in there, usually it's washed out by the water flowing through the pipe. And I mean, we have had some cases where we have put a bit of a grate or some of that hog wire just kind of up against the end of the pipe just to act as a second deterrence. But we haven't run into any issues of them plugging the end. Yeah.
Okay, the next one is, has a study been done by Calgary to see what the costs have become for them for flooding because of years of removing beavers?
Oh, sorry, Guy. I might have to get you to repeat that. It was a little cut off in the beginning.
Sorry. The question is, has a study been done by anyone, specifically Calgary, to see what the costs have been for them for flooding because of years of removing beavers?
That's an interesting question. Not to my knowledge have they done a cost analysis on that. And a lot of these tools are just starting to be broadly accepted within Alberta. And so even, that cost benefit fact sheet that I was telling you about with some of these tools, we could only find 2 cases in Alberta, where it's been calculated the cost before and the cost for after. Where it gets a little complicated is when it comes to the maintenance of the trails or road systems. They're not always categorized as to like why they had to, go out there and maintain the site. They're not specifically always looking for, the comparison of before and after installations. So that's still a bit of a knowledge gap that we're hoping to help address. The city of Calgary is trying to coexist with beavers wherever possible. Like I said, that culvert protector site was on their property, as well as they have installed pond levelers. But as when it comes to cost benefit analysis, that there's still a bit of a knowledge gap there.
Okay, next one is, has there been estimates done in Alberta to quantify the benefits of beaver ponds for waterfowl wetland creation?
I would say Alberta specific studies, not that I'm aware of. I could be wrong as well. There's always ongoing and new research, which we endeavor to find as readily as possible. There has been some research done in the Pacific Northwest, so Montana, I think Washington and Idaho have some done on that as well. There is research ongoing, but I'm not sure if it's specifically in Alberta, but beavers do have a positive impact on wetland creation, and then of course that would impact positively waterfowl by providing habitat.
Okay, and the next question is, my in-laws have a beaver on the pond by their cabin. They rely on water from the nearby well, and they're concerned about water quality issues. They want the beaver gone. What should I tell them?
That's a good question, and a question that we get quite often. So beaver kind of have this unfortunate stereotype of giving people beaver fever, which is Giardia, a bacteria that's carried in the fecal samples, fecal coliforms from beavers. But it's not only beavers that carry Giardia. It's actually, you're just as likely to have Giardia present in water coming from any wild species that is in that watershed, or even cattle can sometimes carry that as well. So like any wildlife on the landscape, obviously I'm not a water quality expert, but I would say that your risk of having beaver or any wildlife, it's the same as having deer present or cattle present nearby. But beaver haven't been shown to. It just happens that they run with like beaver and fever, and that's kind of how they got that misnomer. But you're just as at risk whether it's any wildlife, whether it's beaver, deer, moose that are in that watershed. And one interesting benefit, aside from the sediment and the pollutants that can be captured in the actual pond itself, in the sediment, the wetland that is created as a result of that beaver doing what he does, building dams. We had one landowner who said that his well was very much reliant on the beaver being present on his landscape, because in dry years, he was certain that his well would have run dry if it weren't for the beaver pond that was directly adjacent to his property. So from a water storage perspective, they do have a huge impact on wells as well.
And that's the end of the questions, but there are a couple of comments, and I think we have enough time. And Holly, see if you want to just add anything on. One person from BC said, we see beaver eating knotweed and Himalayan blackberry here, and they've been observed dragging off salmon carcasses. There's also been anecdotal research from Alaska about beaver feeding on salmon carcasses, subtitled Opportunistic Use of a Seasonally Superabundant Food Source. So this came up during your comments about beavers and fish.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I will have to look into that. I have seen the one video of a beaver dragging a fish carcass out and seemingly putting it up to his mouth. I can't say whether or not he was eating it. But yeah, maybe I'll have to look and see if there's been some new research out there on that. Thanks for the comment.
And just to follow up on the last point, one person wrote, encourage the in-laws to regularly test their groundwater. It's free of charge from the health units.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that comment.
And then one more question just popped in. Are there any studies about what to do about beaver overpopulation? It seems that wolves keep them under control.
Okay, I'm just thinking that one through. So beavers have a lot of natural predators. I mean, in a natural ecosystem undisturbed by humans, of course, population would be managed naturally by predators such as you said, wolves. Bears will predate on coyotes, wolverines, cougars, coyotes can sometimes even catch them too. When they're most vulnerable is usually when they're wandering out of their ponds to go and get trees and cut them and bring them back to their water. Yeah, I mean, in some situations, there are issues with overpopulation. That kind of has to do a lot of the time with situations where there's maybe not enough predators in the area. Now, as an example, that could be in an urban context. So in the city of Calgary, we have about 400 beavers in the city. There hasn't been a formal population number, like survey done, but that would be an estimate. And if you look at the system, that would be way over what our normal population numbers of beavers would be for the amount of wetlands and stream systems that we have. And a lot of that is to do with, of course, we don't have a lot of those predators in our city as readily as would be, without human interaction. But I think there's still, like I said, the city of Calgary tries to coexist with beavers as much as they can. And so I think there's still a possibility, to work with some of the challenges that they pose to have the benefits on their landscape. But there is sometimes a case where there's very low tolerance at a certain site for various reasons, and then maybe trapping is an option there.
And that's it for questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions and comments. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. If you'd like to follow up with me after, please feel free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks so much, everyone.